us today. This meeting is being recorded, and so just wanted to let you know that. I want to put up a poll real quick before we get started to help our presenter know what kind of industry that you are in. So I'm putting up a poll right now. What best describes your industry? Research, pharmaceutical and therapeutics, medical and life sciences, engineering, software, digital health, devices, or anything else, just put other. And I'll leave that up on the screen for about a minute, and that will help our presenter know where everybody's from. So we are very happy to have with us today from Scalar, David Hales and Jameson Jenkins. And as soon as I finish up with the polling, they're going to launch a slide presentation. And let me just finish up the poll question. Looks like everybody's answered it. So I will end the polling now. It looks like most of you are in pharmaceutical therapeutics, research, medical and life sciences, a couple of devices and digital health, and a couple of software. So thank you so much for that. And that's the results of the polling. So David, are you ready? Jameson, you can go ahead and start sharing your slides if you'd like. And everybody else, if you wouldn't mind just keeping your cameras off and your microphones off as well. That will help preserve bandwidth and help keep things quiet for us. And David, go ahead and take it away.
Sounds great. Thanks, Renee, and thanks for everybody hopping on here today to talk a little bit about the valuation of life science companies. Before we get started, we wanted to quickly just give you guys a quick overview about, who Scalar is and who we are. My name's David Hales, as mentioned. I am a Vice President of Business Development here at Scalar and represent the firm in the Pacific Northwest. Scalar is a leading independent valuation firm throughout the United States, and we, pride ourselves in being a world-class, firm and being able to give the highest level of service while also, having the efficiency of a startup and getting work done efficiently and dedicating ourselves to our clients. Our team, recognizes that every client is very unique, and we work really hard to make sure that our valuations are fine-tuned to, the needs and what they need going forward, and uncovering business opportunities for them to help them plan for success. Three things that kind of really set us apart is one, our experience. We have performed over 10,000 valuations and perform about 170, 180 valuations a month. Our team works hard at getting the necessary credentials to perform these valuations, such as having, CPAs on board, ASAs, CFAs, and CVAs. And, all our valuations have been performed, and we haven't had, much issues in having to defend these valuations in front of Big Four accounting firms or the SEC. As far as our specialties lie, we range from early stage startups to large publicly traded companies. And we pride ourselves in being industry agnostic, with definitely a higher percentage of our clients being in the technology space as well as the life science space. Those are kind of our two largest industries that we see a lot of clients in. We also feel like something that sets us apart from other valuation providers is our process. We provide quick turnaround times and getting valuations done within 2 to 3 weeks and having drafts in front of our clients within 5 to 7 business days. And, our valuations are critiqued, and we go through a multi-tier review approach where you can feel ensured that there's not just one person working on your valuation, but a team of people that will be looking it over to make sure that we have all our I's dotted and all our T's crossed as we get these valuations done. From here, we have 4 different types of, buckets we like to view the type of valuation work we do. One being on the financial reporting side, the stock-based comp expense, compensation expense, versus price allocation, portfolio valuation, transaction advisory, fairness opinion, enterprise valuation, valuation consulting, tax services, think 409A, gift and estate, and litigation consulting. Today, I brought along one of my colleagues. His name is Jameson Jenkins. He is a director here at Scalar and has been a part of the team for several years. And he is very much focused on working with our life science clients and being able to provide, lots of different types of valuation services. And one of the things he does a lot of is valuation consulting for early stage startups as they're trying to figure out their value and going forward and helping them build out commercialization models, as well as helping them for any type of valuation consulting and whatever needs come up. And he has a vast experience in working in life science. He actually started his career in being a pharmacist and pivoted towards finance. And from there, he's built a strong career at Scalar, and we're very lucky to have him on. And from here, I'll pass the time over to him.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, David. And I'm excited to talk with everyone today, and let's get to the meat of it now, of valuation of life science companies. When it really comes down to it, this is my passion. This is what I really get excited about. As David mentioned, we work on a lot of tech companies and then a lot of biotech or life science companies. And the interesting thing about life science companies, as most of you are probably aware, is that they're not as straightforward as other typical valuations. And so you really have to think through them. You have to understand the business, and you get to see a lot of cool tech out there and see how people are changing the world. During the valuation process, there's really 6 steps to that. And the 6 steps are defined right here for the development and the reporting of valuation. And what I wanted to do today is to go over these 6 steps with an emphasis on the 4th step, the application and approaches to the value. That being said, it's important for us to, as a provider and also as the client, to understand these 6 steps so that we can do the correct valuation. So moving forward into the first step, and the first and second step go hand in hand with one another. The first step being defining the problem. So what does the client need? As we approach evaluation, there's a bunch of different types of evaluations, as David had mentioned, that we can perform. I wrote down 4 of them: consulting, tax, financial reporting, and litigation. Some of these valuations are just as need basis, and then other times these valuations they're required by regulatory bodies, whether that be SEC, the IRS, or if in Canada, the CRA. In regards to some of the types of valuations that we'd see underneath these buckets, the consulting, we do a lot of consulting for companies that are looking at fundraising. They're not sure what their business is worth and what their assets are worth, and they don't want to undervalue their business. That being said, they also don't want to go out and pitch to VC firms, friends and family, whomever it may be, and not get funding. Also, for later stage companies or companies that are moving forward in the process, depending on what they are doing, we can consult for M&A purposes, IPO, and so on. Tax purposes, in most cases, we see some sort of gift and estate work that we'll work on. Financial reporting, in most cases, this has to do with either stock comp expense, so you want to bring on a key member to the team, or if specific things need to get fair valued. In most cases for financial reporting, you don't know you need it until your auditor lets you know that you need it. So this can be fair valuing of conversion rights for convertible debt, a lot of stuff that quite frankly can be boring to the layman. And then lastly, probably the least fun of the four is litigation. If there's a shareholder dispute, if there's a buy-sell agreement based off of some sort of divorce or whatever it may be, we perform litigation. Now, as I mentioned, defining the problem also flows into the second step, and this is determining the appropriate scope of work. Once we've defined exactly what needs to be done, what type of valuation you want, we want to see who, when, what, why. So as we perform evaluation, a lot of times people think of valuation on an enterprise level or the business as a whole. That being said, there are specific assets at times that need to be valued. This can be, I'll give some real world examples. This could be, say you are a pharmaceutical company and you have a few lead assets. You may want to spin off one of those assets. We can value that asset. Another example would be, we just performed a valuation on a priority review voucher. What is that PRV worth? Because it was going to be acquired by a large publicly traded company. So that's an example. And then of course, from an enterprise level, valuing the business as a whole. Also, when does this need to be valued? This is important for multiple reasons. First off, for financial reporting reasons or tax reasons, we need to know when that needs to be valued because the value can be quite different depending on the date. Also, who is going to be engaging us? Is it a specific individual? Is it the company? The fourth is when do you need the work done? The time frame. What do you need it quickly? There's times that we're working with a company right now within the biotech space that's looking to IPO here shortly. And so when we hear they need something done, typically we have it turned around within 24 to 48 hours. In other cases, that 5 business day time frame works for people. So then that leads into our third piece on the valuation, and this is the data collection. And then we analyze the data. Now, once again, going back to step 1 and 2, it's important to understand what we are valuing. If it's just the enterprise as a whole, we might not need the capitalization table. Whereas if we're valuing a specific security, then we would need that. So collecting the working documents, looking over those working documents. Also within this, there's really 3 buckets of data collection. The first would be financial data. The second would be capitalization. And then lastly would be non-financial data. Financial data gives us a lot of information, but there's also a lot of non-financial information that we need to sift through and understand, especially within the biotech space, understanding what phase of development you're in, what studies have been run, where you're currently at in that process, just a slew of questions that we'll go through. And then the documentation, of course, will be based off of that scope of work. Now, moving forward, and this is where we take that data and then we apply that to valuation approaches. Now, when you look at valuation as a whole, it's actually quite simple. There's 3 separate valuation methodologies, and then within those valuation methodologies, there's subsections. And those sections are a cost, a market, and an income approach. And you can see here on the screen that I've tossed up cost, market, and income, and I've put some examples underneath each of these. And what I wanted to do today is to give an example, more of a real world example, where people could relate, and then we'll go a little deeper into the valuation approaches. So first off, in regards to the cost approach, if we were to look at a home, and let's say that a builder built a home and it cost raw materials, it cost the builder $400,000. One of the approaches that we could take would be just how much money, how much raw material went into building that home. And the answer would be $400,000. And so we could opine on a value of $400,000. That being said, a little more sophisticated way for us to look at it would be, hey, there was $400,000 put into this home, but also there's some sweat equity. Sometimes we would call it an entrepreneurial incentive. And so what is that value? And let's say we say it's $100,000. So our cost approach at that point would say the 400,000 plus the 100,000 is 500,000. And similar to this home that we're looking at, that we're valuing, you can do that with businesses. And the subsequent slide, we'll see that. But essentially, we can look at how much money has been put into the business, look at certain entrepreneurial incentives and sweat equity to opine on a value. So that's the cost approach. The market approach, this is a very common valuation methodology as well. The market approach, you can look at similar transactions. So let's say that you're a therapeutic business and you can look at similar transactions, M&A transactions, IPOs. What are those businesses worth? Also, you can look at multiples, and we'll go into this, but multiples on revenue, if there is revenue, on EBITDA, if there is EBITDA, you can look at the implied value on certain stages of development for pharmaceutical assets. And the example that I like to use here is this is commonly used within the real estate market for the market approach. So once again, going back to a home, common ground for people would be if you had a home that was 6-bedroom, 4.5 bathroom, 6,000 square feet, what would the real estate agent do for you? They would look at comparable comps. They would look around your area and say, hey, look, this home's selling for $700,000, this one's selling for $650,000, maybe take a blended average or whatever it may be, and put your home on the market for $675,000. And so we take a similar approach there. And then lastly, the third approach is the income approach. And so the income approach uses something called a discounted cash flow, or DCF, also risk-adjusted net present value. And the easiest way to think of this is a business is worth what its future cash flows are going to be, and then you discount that accordingly. And so just from a very, very high level in finance theory is if you were to be offered $1,000 right now or $1,000 here in a year from now, which one would you take? And in most cases, you'd want to take that $1,000 right now because you can use that $1,000 to hopefully generate more money. Where that $1,000 here in a year from now is worth less to you. And so we do a similar approach in that we look at a business, we look at its future cash flows, and those cash flows that are further out are discounted more so because they're further away, and then we bring it back to present value to opine on a value. And then the risk-adjusted net present value is very similar. The only difference is that, especially within the biotech space, the outcomes are binary in nature. And so if you don't have a successful phase 1 study or phase 2 or whatever it may be, then there's just risk of not proceeding or moving forward. And so that's what the risk-adjusted net present value gives us. Moving forward, I wanted to show some quick examples of the approaches that we take. You can see here, this is a cost approach. So what we've done is we've looked at the research and development. You can see that that's totaled up to $14.5 million. We then look at kind of the sweat equity, entrepreneurial incentive, everything else like that, and add those up to applying on the value of $15 million. There's a lot here, and we can talk over this more in depth if ever that came to the case, but I think that that's sufficient for the cost approach, especially because the cost approach is typically not used when there's other valuation methodologies. Moving forward, we have the market approach, and this is once again, just a sample. Typically when we send over exhibits, there will be 20, 30, 40 pages. I just screenshot one of them. So what we did is we took some publicly traded comparable companies, and then we looked at revenues, we looked at growth, margins, size, profitability, everything like that. And if you look to the right, you can see that we're using last 12-month revenue and next 12-month revenue and EBITDA figures. Essentially what you do, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but what we do is if there is revenue for a later stage company, we will apply those revenue multiples to the subject company's financials. That being said, a lot of times we come across companies that are in clinical, they're either preclinical or they're in clinical development. So how do we use a market approach to value those businesses? There's multiple valuation methodologies that we can use. One that we really like and is very applicable is we will find peer companies, so public companies and transaction companies, and we'll look at the number of assets that they have in both preclinical and clinical development. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then we will find the implied value for each of those assets, and then we'll apply that value to the number of assets that this preclinical or clinical development company has. Similar, you can do that with medical device companies, even though medical device companies, in most cases, we will use an income approach, which we'll talk about after this. And then one other approach that we use for the market approach is looking at some sort of rate of return. So what if an investor were to come into this business and invest money, what type of rate of return would they expect to get on this investment? Moving forward to our last approach, our last valuation approach. This is a discounted cash flow. And so what you can see here is similar to what I had discussed before. A business is worth what its future cash flows are going to bring in. This company here, you can see, has revenue, and not only revenue, but they're also operating profitably. So of course, this is a little later stage of a company. So what we do is we look at its free cash flows, and then we discount that. And so once again, I apologize, I don't know if my mouse is working or not, but in this latter year, you can see that the free cash flows are $19.5 million. But that being said, once we discount those, the present value of that $19.5 million is really about $10 million. So what we do is we present value that discrete period, and then we apply a terminal value. And the theory of that is that there's, once again, in theory, businesses are going to operate into perpetuity. And so a lot of times you will use some sort of revenue or EBITDA multiple. In this case, we used a blended revenue multiple of the $90.1 million and then the $26 million in EBITDA to find an estimated exit value and then discount that accordingly. So those are really the three approaches. The only difference to this discounted cash flow and the risk-adjusted net present value is that the risk-adjusted net present value would be for clinical stage businesses. So we would see the cash flows coming in later years. And then there would be some sort of probability associated with those cash flows, just due to the likelihood of passing certain clinical development stages. So once we've looked at these valuation methodologies, the fifth step for us is that we want to reconcile these values. As you can imagine, is we look at 5, 10 different types of valuations. Some are going to give us values that are quite low. Some are going to give us values that are quite high. Some are applicable to that current company, and some are not. And so what we want to do is we want to analyze our values and make sure that they make sense for the client and for the purpose of why they are going out to the market, what they're going to be using that valuation for. And then once we have reconciled those values and come up with our opinion, our third-party opinion, that leads to the final step, and that's reporting the value. Now, reporting the value, depending on, once again, what type of valuation we are performing, the reported value will come in different. That could come in exhibits, that can come in narrative, that can come into an Excel. Typically for narrative, that's for financial reporting. And so what we can do our work, we can give it to you, you can pass it on to your auditors, to the SEC, to whomever, and then you don't have to worry about it. Whereas if we're doing it, if we're doing some sort of consulting, then it may come in more of an exhibit or an Excel piece, so that you can work through it. You can look at what we've done and have the answers for that. And so from a high level, the valuation of life science companies is it's very tailored to that business. It is a tough topic to talk on, because each company is so individual and so different that this is kind of a broad net that we've cast on, hey, this is how we can value them, but each business is so different. So what we wanted to do, and what I like to do, I've had the opportunity to present throughout the nation over the last few years. And what I find the most engaging is to have a Q&A and answer the questions that people may have and companies may have. So now I would like to open up the floor to any questions that there may be, and hopefully we can answer those for you.
Great, thank you, Jameson. Really appreciate it. That was a helpful presentation, and we do have some questions in the chat. The first question is from Emmanuel, and he is asking, in the market approach, what comparables do you use for a private company that is not publicly traded?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And so typically we will look at 2 sets of comps if we're doing an income approach. And the reason for looking at 2 sets of comps is, first off, there's earlier stage pharmaceutical companies or med device companies, and we can look at similarities there. But then once a company has reached its optimal operation efficiencies, then we will use more of your bulge bracket, like your big pharma. And it depends on if we're talking pharma, therapeutics, med device. But let's say it's a pharmaceutical company. In that case, then we'd use our GSKs and Pfizers and everything else in that terminal, because in theory, they're operating at a level that's ideal to the market. But that being said, going back to earlier stage companies, if we're looking at just a market approach, sometimes we can't find, there aren't publicly traded companies that are comparable to the subject business. so what we will do is we will use transactional data for private companies.
Okay, great. Thank you. Emmanuel, is there anything else that you wanted to add to your question?
No, no further questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question is from Douglas Kawahara. He is asking, what are you using as a discount rate for preclinical drug development companies?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And it depends on the purpose of our valuation. So if it's for fundraising or for M&A, of course, we're going to use the lower end of the discount rate because that juices up the value. But to give you a range of discounts, you're probably looking at anywhere for preclinical, anywhere from about 15% to 30%. And the reason being is that this goes back to guidance from the valuation industry in general, is the AICPA suggests that if you're risk adjusting, you're already capturing some of that risk through that binary nature. And so you don't want to apply a huge discount of 50 or 60% because you've already captured that binary outcome. And so I would say middle of the fairway would be 15 to 30%, and that can be found in guidance with the AICPA B.01 if you really wanted to dig into that.
Great. Douglas, do you want to open your microphone? I saw that you asked a second question as well.
Well, I think it's going to be a lot of financial discussion back and forth. I mean, the discount rate is always challenging, and I don't think most people aren't going to do the really sophisticated risk-adjusted MPV and that type of stuff. So I think the other side is the other question really had to do with grant funding as opposed to invested capital, and I think that's also another thing that's going to be a big play for most of the startup companies. And how do you value that versus invested capital?
Yeah. So once again, it depends on the valuation that we are performing. In most cases, the valuation is done on something called a going concern. And so it's what's known or knowable at the time of the valuation. And so in that case, with grants, it is assumed that, and this is guidance from management, it's assumed that if there's a $5 million grant that's assumed to come in, that we'll use that. And of course, that impacts the cash flow statement.
Okay, good. The next question is from Jeremy. He's asking, what is used to justify using a particular multiple of EBITDA, 3 times, 6 times, et cetera, for valuation?
Yep. So typically what we do, we look at 3 different metrics as we look at multiples. And those metrics are size, growth, and profitability. And so, for instance, if we go back to that concept that I had shown before, most of those companies were large companies. They are companies that have diversified revenue streams, they less risk, and so first off, we look at the size. Second is growth. In most cases, earlier stage companies are going to have higher growth, and then lastly is profitability. Public costs are typically profitable, not always, but typically, whereas earlier stage companies are typically not profitable. So we look at that analysis, and sometimes we'll run regressions, and we'll look at future outcomes, and then we will select a multiple accordingly based off of size, growth, and profitability.
Okay, Jeremy, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, thank you for answering. I'm just wondering, when it comes down to somebody saying, well, we're only going to pay this X EBITDA, and I know with profitability and growth, and then you said there was another factor. You're basically saying you're going to do a regression on those items and have a set in stone EBITDA multiple that can be justified with those.
That's correct. Yeah. So typically, especially if it's our consulting side, is then you've had a third party run that analysis. So it's just another bullet in the chamber, if you will. And so a lot of times what we'll do, especially for the consulting side, is we're shooting more towards those top quartile multiples. And so mathematically and quantitatively, we can create that story, because that's really what it comes down to in a pitch is, do you have that story? Do you have that ammunition to go to that VC or to whomever and justify why you think you're worth that top quartile instead of the bottom quartile, or whatever it may be.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good questions. David Katz has a question. Please discuss IP valuation approaches, which are often central for life science companies, particularly when looking at book value for early stock options and warrant valuation.
Yeah. So IP valuations are actually probably one of the biggest types of valuations that we do within life science. And the most common methodologies that we use would be a market approach and one's an income approach. So the market approach is called a relief from royalty. And what we do is we look at royalty rates based off of similar IP, which can be found in Qs and Ks of publicly traded companies. And then we find out that relief, or that you not having to pay that to royalty, and how much that's worth. Another approach, and a more common approach, is called an MPEM, or a multi-period excess earnings valuation. And that's similar to a discounted cash flow, but what you do is you split off that asset. And so there's obsolescence to that asset. There's contributory asset charges to that asset. There's a whole line to that IP, whatever the IP that we're valuing, right? And so we'll use this MP method to value that. And I think it was kind of a two-piece question. So first off, it was how we would value the IP, and then second off, it had to do with fair market valuing the options or warrants, depending on who's being issued those. And so that typically here in the US, that falls under something called IRC 409A. And so the IRS, they require you to have a valuation done that fair market values the options or the warrants. And in most cases, 99.9% of the time, those options or warrants are options or warrants on common shares. And so we'll fair value those common shares so that you can set a strike price for those options and warrants.
David, anything else you wanted to add to your question?
Yeah, so I think what a lot of companies face with IP valuation is that they have IP either that is not issued or issued, but not yet put into operation. And so, I mean, methods like MP are really hazardous because there's so many assumptions under them. And I mean, one thing that what we came up with in discussion with our accountants ultimately on valuing the IP for this purpose was that we put it at book value at the cost to date of filing and prosecuting the IP. And that, I mean, they preferred that to to anything that involved a lot of future assumptions for something
Yeah,
that wasn't
yeah,
yet
and so
operating.
that's actually a really good point, and this goes back to understanding the scope of the valuation. So in regards to if this is for compensation purposes, some sort of option issuance, our goal is to come out on the lower end of the range. And so in this case, we wouldn't be, if we were valuing the IP, we wouldn't be looking at all this future value and a lot of the hypothetical value and everything else like that. And we would agree, maybe looking at, as you mentioned, book value, some sort of cost to recreate, a few valuation methodologies that are still supported so that if it ever were challenged by a regulatory body, you had support for it. But that being said, it's on that lower end. The flip side to that would be if you had someone come to you and they wanted to purchase that IP, in that case, then our goal, of course, would be to get as much out of it as possible for you guys. And that's where we would utilize these more advanced techniques.
Yeah, and I think the other interaction we had with the accountants was them saying to us how happy they were that we came to them to get a concurrent valuation because they've seen so many people who, you know, in early stage companies who have issued stock or options or warrants without without a concurrent valuation and leave themselves at risk for future tax liabilities.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. I would say for earlier stage companies, probably the most common valuation that we do is this 409A valuation. And essentially this came up in 2004 where the IRS, a lot of people were issuing options at just a penny. And so the IRS was losing out on money. They were issuing in the money options. And so now they've kind of buckled down on that and they've required it. So yeah, to get those fair valued or fair market valued in this case is an important step. And we've seen transactions fall apart due to not having the correct financial reporting pieces in place.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question is from Bill Newman. He asks, how do you value companies based on drugs which have not gone through the FDA approval process, and so it's not known if the product will even reach the market?
Yeah, and that's where really the binary nature comes out of that, is that either probably the easiest way to think of this from a very, very simplistic standpoint is based off of the drug and its indication and where it's at in the clinical development. There's studies out there. Biomed is the most common, where it shows the probability of getting through each stage, right? So if you're just beginning in your phase 1, there's X percentage probability of getting through that, and so on and so forth, all the way to your NDA or BLA. And then subsequently there's risk even with commercialization, but just for the clinical part, we'll focus on that. So let's say that you are an early stage phase 1 company, you've just gotten into phase 1. Give or take, there's a 5-10% probability based on, once again, indication, application, everything else like that, that you will get to your NDA or BLA. In that case, then, and once again, this is really, really high level, but if you're able to reach that point and you are able to commercialize, there might be a value of $100 million. On the flip side, if you don't get through those regulatory processes, then the business is worth 0. And so once again, from the most simplistic standpoint, there's 10% probability on $100 million. There's 90% probability on 0, and then you discount that back to a present value. That's an income approach. Also, there's other ways that we can look at it. You can look at licensing agreements. You can look at similar transactions if there are within the market based off of drug indication, everything else. So let's see if there's any more questions. That's kind of a broad question, but I hope I was able to scratch the surface on that.
Yeah, great. So we do have another question from Daniel Ladizinski. He asks, in M&A, a company value will be magnified differently by the acquirer's commercial reach. Do you do high and low scenarios based on likely acquirers, or just generate a core valuation?
Yeah. So we actually work with a few publicly traded companies that do a lot of acquiring. And so we'll work with their FP&A teams and whatnot. There's a few ways to look at that. And the way, so it's a great question, first off. The answer is it's all based off of this synergy, right? That synergy. So in the real world, 1 + 1 = 2, or in kind of the fake world, 1 + 1 = 2, but in a lot of cases, 1 + 1 = 5. And so there's a few ways that we can look at that. We can look at who is the acquirer and what ability do they have to take it to market. And that's why a lot of times people either license with bigger companies because of their outreach, their channels. Channels are huge. Second off, there's another way that you can look at it. And it's based off of what we would call a control premium. And this is a market approach where we can look at that synergistic pop and how you do it. I don't want to lose people on the minutia and kind of the boringness, but we look at similar transactions within the market, and we look at what we call a 1-week premium. So prior to the transaction's announcement, and then 1 week later, what has happened to that stock price, and we look at that premium, and you can capture that premium and then allocate that to your value as well. So there's a few different ways that you can capture that, but those are the two most common within our industry.
Okay, great. Dan, did you have anything you wanted to add to your question?
Oh, that was a great answer. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Great. Our next question is from Steadwin Coleman, and he asks, are management team personnel's previous successes and failures or the customer traction taken into account for valuations?
Oh yeah. That's a huge, and this is where there's art and then science to valuation, and management experience is huge. Because you're betting on the jockey along with the horse. I can give you an example of that is some of the old Kite executives, Kite Therapeutics, they subsequently then went on to start another business, Allogene. And in that case, it's like they got a ton of money right behind them from huge players, and right out the gate they were just rocking and rolling. Now that's similar to, and then they subsequently IPO'd, was it last year or 2 years ago? My time's blending, especially with COVID, so I apologize. But within a 9-month period, these guys took an idea and IPO'd for billions of dollars. So management and their experience is a huge piece. I always like to use the example of if Steve Jobs were still alive, right? And he were to come out and say, hey guys, I'm going to start a technology company the likelihood of that valuation being higher would be very likely. So that is baked into the valuation and is a very important. We consider that a non-financial piece of the information of the valuation.
Okay, Steadwin, did you have anything else you wanted to add to your question? Nope, he's good. Okay, so that was our last question. While we're waiting for any more, and I also, Jameson, I want to thank you. That was, thank you for making this very complex topic a little bit easier to understand. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate Scalar for leading and sponsoring this presentation today. If anybody has any other questions, please go ahead and put it in the chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to put up a poll, and it's our after program survey poll. And so if you would please fill this out, hopefully you can see it on your screen right now. Good, looks like some people are voting. So, and then if anybody has any other questions, please put it in the chat. And somebody just asked if it's possible to get a copy of the slides. And yes, I will be sending out a copy of the recording of this event and a copy of the slide presentation a little bit later on this afternoon. Any other questions?
Yeah, and then I was just going to say, if there are any other questions, feel free to reach out. I think the subsequent page, yeah, you have David and my information, but feel free to reach out. Life science companies, there's a lot of complexity, and even if you're in the therapeutic space, it's just so different that we more than happy to hop on a call, discuss any of the intricacies to make sure that you know, we can answer your questions.
Okay, great, thank you. Somebody did ask to see. Somebody asked, I wonder, Karen Anderson asked, I wonder how frequently you use recruiters to hire seasoned executives as part of your process.
Recruiters, I guess I don't completely understand that question, Karen.
Karen, do you want to open your mic? Okay, while we're waiting for her, we have a question from Steadwin. He asked, will there be a chance to see the spreadsheet of how you perform the evaluations, the math, etc.? Those spreadsheets that were included in the slides?
Yeah, we could yeah. We could clean those up and send them over, absolutely.
And somebody else said, we consider ourselves more of a tech company and are planning to use VC method to evaluate our company. Any input on that?
Yeah. So tech company, in a lot of cases, a tech company is going to be valued, and it depends on what type of tech you're going to have. But if there's some sort of monthly active user, so MRR, where you've got your monthly recurring revenue, those are important metrics. What type of tech company is this going to be? More of a SaaS-based type tech, or could I get a little more clarity on that?
Shiva, do you want to open your microphone?
Hey, this is Shiva. Thanks for taking my question. We are not into SaaS or social kind of thing, but we are more into applying technology to the medical image processing.
Yeah. So there's a few ways that we could look at that, and a lot of it would just be dependent on how you plan on making money in the future. Where is this going to be? I believe you said it was based off of imaging. So is this going to be a per client where doctors put in the orders, or how plan on making money in the future, and then we'd apply those multiples to peer groups.
Okay, thank you.
We also have a question from Ken Stedman, and he's asking for ballpark numbers. How much would a consulting valuation through Scalar cost for an early stage preclinical company?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it depends on how in depth you wanted it. In most cases, you're probably looking, I'll give you a ballpark right now. You're probably $5,000 to $10,000 for that. For preclinical, it's going to be on that lower end of the range. The only caveat to that was if you wanted us to do a full market approach. And what I mean by that is a top-down approach, looking at total available market, and what type of market penetration you could have, and so on and so forth. In that case, it would get a little more expensive. But for consulting and for I'll be quite honest, for a preclinical stage company, there's really no reason for that analysis. So I'd say 5K is kind of the sweet spot.
Okay, Ken, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? I actually don't see him. Okay. Karen Anderson had asked a question about recruiting earlier, and she added a little bit more into the chat. She said, we recently recruited a CEO into a 24 million revenue after vesting value more than doubled. A proven way to increase value. Do you use them in short term or at all?
Yeah, so bringing in a seasoned vet, that would be more of the qualitative portion of our valuation, where depending on the type of valuation that we're looking at, we would either decrease the discount rate or increase the multiple based off of that confidence and their professional ability.
Okay. All right, great. Any last questions before we close today? Thank you, Jameson. Thank you, David. Thank you, Scalar, for a really, really great presentation. We had a lot of participation today, which was wonderful to see. And we really appreciate your support of the OBI. We appreciate everybody who came to attend today. And I will be sending out a recording and the slides later on this afternoon. So you are welcome to view those at your leisure. Any final words, Jameson?
No, I appreciate everyone having us. It's exciting to see, like I said at the start, love to see the new tech that's coming out of all the different places. You have your typical hot spots in the US, but it's fun to see, the tech that's coming out of Portland and the surrounding areas. And more than happy to answer any other questions if people want.
Yeah, you've got their email addresses right there on the screen, so feel free to reach out. Thanks again to everyone who attended today. Thank you for presenting today. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.
Okay, take care.
All right, thanks. Bye, everybody.